welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast. We're having a somewhat different start to our conversation today because we're having a very different conversation. Our guests from the Lithuanian consulting firm Partners in Comms have a very different take on what's happening in the world, particularly internal communication. Coming from a Lithuanian perspective and also as, increasingly as experts on internal communication outside the English-speaking world. And we wanted to set this conversation up from the beginning rather than do the summary at the end. Janet, what are your thoughts of the conversation?
I really enjoyed it because I realised that I don't speak to enough communication professionals who are outside the English-speaking world. And so I have a blinkered approach? Possibly. But having worked in global organisations and with all of the reading that I do that kind of looks to pull in different cultural aspects, it was absolutely brilliant to have a conversation with two women who are living this, breathing it, experiencing it, experimenting with it, trying new things, and looking to navigate the disruption that is the communications profession outside of the English-speaking world.
And I admire their willingness to try to disrupt the English-speaking profession.
100%.
Going out and writing a book in Lithuanian and then getting it translated into English using case studies that are purposely called for, and the book is called The Connected Organizations.
Yeah.
And I was involved with conversations around it from the beginning. And I just think what they're doing is really powerful. So I'd like to turn it over to them and we'll start the actual podcast now. But consider that we're coming from a very different perspective today. Welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast with Janet Hitchen and me, Mike Klein. Navigating Disruption is a podcast that aims to help leaders and organizations navigate the disruption that lies ahead. This episode, we speak with Vija Valentukonyte and Giedrė Simanauskaitė. Vija and Giedrė form up a consulting firm in Lithuania called Partners in Comms, and a partnership it truly is. Whether it's been working with top companies in the Baltics, authoring the first internal comms book in Lithuania to have that book translated into English, which I think has been critical to breaking the English-speaking stranglehold on content in our space. It's a powerful partnership. Welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast.
Hello, really nice meeting you. Mike, you did a great job pronouncing my surname.
Fantastic, I appreciate that.
Hi, Mike now breathes a huge sigh of relief. It's like, phew.
Hi everyone. Really nice to be here. Really nice to be discussing with you all things about internal communications.
Outstanding. Let me just start with a fairly basic question here. Just tell us about yourselves and how you connected as partners and how you've started this collaboration that's gone off in a number of different directions.
Me and Vija, we were really already professionals in our field, working in big corporations as internal communication managers. And we knew each other because we come from pretty tiny market. So first we were calling each other for some support or getting to understand okay, how do you do these things? How it's happening in your organization? What are the best practices? Then we started to meet in the job interviews because if people were headhunting, so usually they headhunted both of us, and then we could, talk who got the position or what was the offer, and then
more importantly, yeah.
Bit of arbitrage.
And in the end, we were thinking, look, we gained lots of experience already, and we admire each other's work. So why not to put all these competencies together and start Partners in Comms instead of being competitors, working in each other's fields. And from this, it grew into friendship. and really like strong partnership in business.
Yeah, and what is more is that we also thought that internal comms as a profession was only starting in Lithuania. So it
Okay.
wasn't even a specialty. As an internal comms manager, probably would be held by three big companies in Lithuania. But we would know that this is a competence that every organization needs. And we started off with a community. So we started off with meeting in the cafes and in different company offices to share experiences about what is going on in internal comms, how different companies are doing it. Because usually when something comes to external communications, you see it in the public eye. While what happens behind the doors, not many people know. And what we found also that it's a big power of the community to actually learn from each other and not to reinvent the wheel many, many times, but to actually apply the practices. So this has also started a bigger community of communications professionals.
I imagine that train of thought also led you to ultimately write your book, particularly the whole concept of helping people avoid excess wheel reinvention. Why did you see that book as a worthy project, and why did you see it as worth the effort?
One
It's
thing
not.
one thing what started actually that we noticed that many people have very similar questions, like how to start, how to assess your internal communication situation, how to build the strategy and so on. And we were eagerly telling and sharing our knowledge with others. So it was one thing, and then the other thing was that people were like not fully trusting foreign books or foreign companies experience, because they were telling like, look, we know companies in US, they have different budgets, they have different cultural situation, they have different people working in the companies, and then they needed to relate the experience they can relate to. And that's why we decided in the book to not share only our knowledge but also to include companies case studies where companies that people know, that people trust, are sharing how they run internal communications and what are their advice and their tips for others. And I think that this was our main goal, like really to educate the market and to support to build this function in organizations.
Yeah, what we really tried here is when I started as a comms professional and when Giedrė started, we started learning by doing, right? And we would be doing the things the way we understand. We wrote this book as part of, and our mission overall was to share and develop this profession, this knowledge base in the market. And the book actually fulfills this. We don't need to meet up with a person to educate about how internal communication works. And we also didn't want it to be the voice of two people, and more than 30 companies have contributed by sharing their practices, by sharing what they do, because this is also how we do things. We don't see that internal comms has one perspective, one correct way of doing things. It's mostly you look into all of the different challenges that you have, into different solutions, and then you see what you can apply, what you can copy with pride, and what can you adapt, or maybe there's something that is completely useless for a particular situation.
So is the audience for your book, are you mainly aiming it at communication professionals, or are you also looking to educate leaders and C-suites on what internal communications could and should be, and not just the mailbox and the newsletter?
Yeah, there is a whole chapter about a good team communication practices. And there is also a chapter for communication specialists about how to engage with the leaders in the best way, how to include them into internal communication, how to make sure that they are the ambassadors and that they are actually, that it's a mutual collaboration, that
Yeah.
leaders drive comms and comms support leaders in achieving the business targets.
And also company leaders, like CEOs of the companies, were contributing and presenting some cases as well. So it was not entirely written by internal communications people, but it's because this function is not existing in all the companies. Some things are covered by HR managers, specialists, some by marketing people, some by company owners or managers themselves. So it's like we really present wide scope of which is valuable for different type of organizations.
So, one of the things that you mentioned in talking about the book was that you had a population of readers back in your country who just weren't really finding the English language content satisfactory enough. What do you see as missing in terms of what you're hearing, either that what you were hearing then or what you're hearing today from the thought leaders and the people with a lot of airtime in the English speaking comm space?
When I was looking into different literature about internal comms, I found it quite specific, and it's quite, I mean, obviously in the Western world, internal comms is much more developed, and it's been developed to different models, to different, let's say, tables and so on. What we really think that our book fulfills is keeping things simple and practical, because not all of the companies in the world and in Europe have the internal communication team of 5 people who can run the whole communications and deliver all the newsletters and everything, and like from strategy to the delivery. And the challenges are the same, no matter if those are big organizations or small organizations, if they have the IC team or they don't have the IC team. So our approach is more practical, like not looking to models. Of course, there are some models, but most of the things are like, what can I do tomorrow after reading this book differently to apply in my organization, to make my organization more connected?
Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode. If you're enjoying the podcast, we'd love your support in helping us reach more listeners. The best way to do that is hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. It's completely free and means you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's content, we'd love you to take a second to leave us a rating or a review. Your support really makes a difference in helping others discover this podcast. Plus, it lets us know what resonates with you so we can keep bringing you more of what you care about. Thanks, and take care from me, Janet in London, and Mike in Iceland.
I also have maybe one practical example, because in the English-speaking world, you assume that everybody basically understands your language. So, and also everybody can Google things or like look on internet things and so on. But if you come to the other markets, there are more languages, and not necessarily people know your language. And then we have also this being lost in translation, being lost in understanding each other and so on. And this is what we also cover in the book, like how to live in a multicultural environment, how to deal with, like if you have a newsletter, so do you translate into 5 languages? Do you find Francolingua? Do you do everything in English, knowing that some people do not understand and so on? So like really applying this advice and also practical cases, how other people, other companies live with this situation.
Yeah, you had a lot of examples in the book of both multinational companies operating in your part of the world and companies from your part of the world operating elsewhere. To what extent have you seen any growth or maturity in the way your business community, particularly in Lithuania and the Baltics, has grown to treat internal comms over, say, the last 5-10 years?
I believe what is in a 5-10 years perspective, in many companies, this function was generally built. Like 5-10 years ago, it was like, I don't know, 5 companies that had a person responsible for internal communications. And then now we have a huge difference. And I think in general, like more global about this perspective, Baltic countries are really digital countries. So, and also these digital solutions are being applied in the company management and also communications in the same sense. So if we have a factory, so instead of, thinking of, we should put the screens somewhere in the corner or in the, canteens, we really apply solutions that are like mobile apps that everybody can access information in the same way. having same user or employee experience. And in this way, when I think about other European or global countries, we are one step ahead at the moment. Maybe you have something to add?
I mean, one of the things that I wanted to ask about was we touched on kind of translation there a little bit, and translation can always be tricky because direct translation or somebody throwing something into Google Translate, sometimes it's not great.
Now
Are you?
It is better.
Oh yeah, I mean sometimes you can get into some really tricky situations, and yeah, I've seen some real nasties. How much are you? Do you work together with transcreation organizations? Do you work with to make sure that actually what you're getting is the tone of voice that you actually you need for an internal audience, as opposed to, hey, we've just done it on the cheap and we've shoved it into Google Translate and oh, it's a bit wonky, but don't worry about it, you'll get the gist. How are you making sure that there's a respectful kind of level of transcreation in a lot of the work that either you need to share or that is coming from multiple directions and organizations?
Yeah, I don't think it's a perfect world out there, so there's no perfect translation ever. But it does come out from the discussion. So basically, the translation can be looked by the local people and see, does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Another thing is that even with the narrative, let's say we have a company from the Netherlands, which is opening a division in Lithuania. Mm-hmm. And the way they talk about the organization, they have it in Dutch, they have it in English. And then when you translate it to Lithuanian, some of the nuance is still lost. Because you cannot use exactly the same words. So it's always a compromise in a way. And sometimes, you can insist as much as you want to use a certain word, which sounds perfect in English, but if it doesn't make sense in the local language, then you have to compromise somewhere, but just ensure that the overall context, the tone of voice stays the same. You still, portray the message that you want to portray in the way that you want it, not exactly using the same words that are directly translated.
Mm.
And it's important to mention that actually we wrote totally from the scratch, maybe 1/3 of the book. And we replaced the case stories, which were like in the Lithuanian version, our first book, really Lithuanian. We replaced it with new cases from other companies, from Czech Republic, from Sweden, from non-English speaking world, in order to give voice to these companies, to really expose like how internal communication is being done in the rest of the world besides English speaking countries. So that's why the book was also translated not by Google Translator people, but by a professional translation team. It's one thing, and the other is like it was also made for the global audience, not for Lithuanians who do not speak Lithuanian.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can get, I worked for a large organization which was US, and for I think when I first started working there were a lot of examples that came from baseball. And or American football, and we very politely sort of said, look, kind of don't care, and we need to figure out.
They really struck out with that one.
Boom. But how can we make sure through translation we're not just translating exact words, but how can we make sure we're using examples that actually make sense within that audience? And I particularly remember the Japanese communications professional who was on our team, and he would spend a long time at the beginning kind of taking stuff and rewriting it because it was coming back from a flat translation as just not fit for purpose. And that's when they started doing huge amounts of work about transcreation and making sure, and then a huge number of people who were based in country, who understood, who the translation could go to them, they could adapt it, they could make sure tone of voice made sense, but they could also use analogies that made sense culturally. because I think, I mean, the baseball thing just, it fell very flat with me. I mean, baseball would work in Japan, obviously, but not in some of the countries that I was working with. So it's so important. And I love the fact that you've kind of said, oh, we look at all these case studies, they're all Lithuanian. Let's mix this up. And you've gone for organisations and companies that would never have had a spotlight shine on them, which is, I think, really important to try and figure out what we can learn from different places. It's hugely, I love the fact that you've done that. I think that's brilliant.
We just scratched
I
the
think
surface, to be honest. There's so much more work to be done here, but definitely we have found lots of interesting cases. And what comes to our region, there is lots of interesting work done in Poland, in Czech Republic, in all of the different places. Let's say, and then you take the Spanish, Portuguese speaking world. It's also a different area and different ways also of working and communicating. So I believe there could be material for another couple of books for sure.
Well, I mean, not just the content, but what do you think we could be doing to better integrate people who are working in internal comms between those who are in the English-speaking world and who are elsewhere? At a community level, at an organizational level, as well as at a thought leadership level.
I think a lot has been done already in terms of connecting people through conferences, through case studies, through sharing experiences in different platforms. Of course, a lot of English-speaking material is available if you look at the sources and the books and so on. Context-wise, maybe it's about connecting all those different communities and finding the platforms where they can join. But then again, the community cannot be too big, because then it creates sub-communities. So there are different movements that are going on all across Europe regarding the IC, and I don't think it's a problem that there's a lot of them.
No, not at all.
I think it's a really good thing to see how we can connect them, how we can share practices and and share the context and cultural aspects of how we do comms.
I think, just adding to that, I think, and I saw this working for Mike, we're back on the fruit company, sorry. But when I was working with the fruit company, one of the most powerful things that we did was give members of our team the opportunity to travel to countries that they would never have been to. And one of the most powerful examples of that was somebody who went from the US, and we sent her to Tokyo. Nice. And she was there to work with the team in Tokyo, and she was there to support our Japanese communication leader. And she came back with such a different perspective. And she was the loudest advocate in the room for, has this been to translation? What do you mean there's no time for translation? We need to make sure this gets translated. Do you understand that the Japanese team are not going to be able to understand this if it's not in Japanese? This is unacceptable. And previously she would never have had that conversation because she didn't have that perspective. And giving her that perspective, it was wonderful to observe her journey from not getting it, not really understanding it. Well, what's the problem? It's in English. I mean, it's fine. Stick it in Google Translate. It's okay. And suddenly having had, I think she was there for a week, and she listened and she spoke to lots of different people, and she saw and observed what was happening, and she became the biggest advocate. And I think giving people the opportunity, I mean, obviously you need budget and you need to be able to travel and all of those wonderful things, but giving people the opportunity to see it for themselves is so important, because it creates a completely different advocacy. I mean, Mike, you've lived in multiple countries where it's not your native language, and you're currently in Iceland.
It's nowhere near my native language.
So how would, I mean, from personal experience?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, my most significant experience in this space was working for an international telecom provider which was headquartered in Amsterdam, had no Dutch business at all, was operating in 14 different markets, 13 of which were developing markets, none of which spoke the same native language. And, really it was kind of funny because we used English to connect the upper management folks. We had basically, it was funny because somebody, one of our weekly comms honorees just posted something that said, if you're creating an intranet for your executives, you should think twice about it. Well, we had an intranet for our executives. That was the point of it. Because without it, there was no way to connect the company on a day-to-day basis other than gathering people for management conferences in Dubai and stuff like that, which obviously was incredibly expensive. And what we were able to do was to at least help them keep the story straight when they localized it for their businesses. Because there was no way we could, credibly and agilely, for lack of a better term, create internal communication in Italian, Ukrainian, Kazakh, Uzbek, Kyrgyz, in any kind of a coherent or quick sort of way. And so this was how we were able to make it work. Were we expecting people in Kyrgyzstan to log on to the corporate intranet? Not until my last boss showed up, which is another conversation. That's why she was my last boss. But, it was, we took, we were able to figure out how to make the language thing work. And it wasn't about translation. We didn't do the translation. We left it to them to do it. But they know they needed to because they knew none of their staff spoke English. Want to explore the burning questions your C-suite and clients are asking? Then you should consider the next Navigating Disruption Mastermind. Janet and I will challenge and coach you in an 8-session program. You'll join other Navigating Disruption listeners and other senior comms pros. For more information, follow the Navigating Disruption page on LinkedIn.
But I think that language is one element, to connect people, but the other very strong element is really to have experience, same experience, similar experience. And in the book, we are also describing the case of B2B, the logistic company. And then one of the ways to help people to communicate, for managers to understand each day of couriers, how do they get information, receive information, how they can share the news and so on. So it's implemented that every new employee and every manager each year spends one day riding with a cart, delivering purchases and so on for clients. And then to have this space to meet each other, to spend time together, and also to understand the environment. How do people work? Where do they work? How do they perceive the world from both sides? It's really valuable, really to bring people together and build company culture and really make communication easier.
One example came to my mind. Sorry, Mike. When we had a cross-cultural team, actually, it was a shared service center in Lithuania, which was headed by a guy from Mexico. And the shared service center was by a British company, so the leadership was mostly from United Kingdom. And what was interesting that we would have the leadership from the United Kingdom come over to Vilnius, and I would be saying, we have the leadership here. This is the first time they seeing the new team. There were like 50 people in that shared service center. And I said, let's do a town hall. Let's give them a broader perspective about the organization. So it was, first question was from the head of shared service center, what is a town hall? Because this was the first time I was hearing it. What is it? And I explained what a town hall is. Of course, you don't need to explain what a town hall is for a British company, because everybody knows what it is. And then the team was completely new, and they are young people. Probably it's one of their first jobs. They definitely have not seen a town hall. And we were like, okay, this is the concept of the event. We're going to have a leadership panel discussion and so on. They will be able to ask questions and stuff like that. And we had this challenge about how do we introduce this event to everyone so would everybody would understand.
Yeah.
And I was saying, you're from Mexico. So once you open the event, you say, imagine a small town in Mexico where there's a major event happening. There are important announcements to be made and important knowledge to be shared. And you call out the whole small town to, tell those things and just tell the story. So the British loved it. The leader explained it in a very simple way so that the team would understand it. And this is how the Lithuanian team was introduced to the concept of town hall. And then it went to the content, and everybody said when is going to be the next town hall held. So I see a lot of opportunities of this, collaborations and how you can mesh different things up and have an impact which is memorable.
If they would add the tacos, maybe everybody would wait for town hall even more.
Yeah, there were some snacks in the end, so maybe not tacos, but...
I think there's some really interesting work that's been done in the space around sort of cultural mapping and trying to understand different cultures. And a lot of that stuff I always find if I was working in summer with a client they're Danish, pharmaceutical, and we were working on a project to support introducing something to a South Korean entity. And so some of the thinking that I was doing behind the scenes was, okay, well, how different is the way Denmark thinks to the way South Korea thinks? And I don't know either. So how can I find that out? Where can I go and look to figure out what is kind of more of the Danish psyche? What is the South Korean? Where does this gel? But where does this actually end up being quite difficult? So when we're looking at things like change management, objection handling, those sorts of things, how can you actually make sure that you're giving the right guidance to somebody? Because they could be kind of very blinkered on, I'm going to deal with this in the way that I would normally deal with with a Danish group of people. Actually, the South Korean leadership was very different. And so we looked at ways of understanding how to tell stories, how to give really good examples, so that it became a no-brainer to do this, to make this change, when initially the South Koreans were kind of like, yeah, no, we see your change, we reject your change. Please go away with your change. How can we help that person be able to do that? And I found it really interesting, and I found it really interesting work. And I think, the way you described, you've got the British, you've got a Lithuanian team, you've got a Mexican leader. Like, how do you understand where all of these different types of people sit? And how do you get them all together so that they create something that actually makes sense? Yeah. It's such interesting work.
In the book, we have a tool for the audience analysis where you can actually give answers to the questions like, who do those people trust, Because some of them will be more hierarchy based, where I trust my leader and my leader has to be local, so maybe we have to go through them. Or maybe they trust someone else, flat societies and so on. So there are questions to be asked and found out the answers. So, Giedrė.
But it's not just... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to just add up that in our consultancy work, what we do for the longer projects, we need to bring the change and to understand the culture. So one thing is we look for the research done in that field, like how to understand what are the cultural patterns. And what was really successful for us to cooperate with the diaspora people, so that they could share with us these deep insights, what we cannot really understand, from 2 months of work together. And then to have this cultural crash course for both sides or three sides before we really start going on into the deep work. And the diaspora was really bringing valuable insights.
It's interesting to hear conversations about culture focus on national culture. Because one of the things that I've noticed is that national culture is only one of a whole bunch of different types of cultures that you get to in an organization. Like professional specialties have their own culture. Comms people collectively have a lot in common. Like the fact that we're having this conversation, we've got three countries represented here, at a minimum, depending on how we define that. And, we're still able to speak roughly the same language together. I mean, conversely, accountants in Denmark get along a lot better with accountants in Holland than they respectively get along with their comms people. To what extent do you mix some of this insight in as well? Particularly given the organizations that you work with.
I think that to talk and to have fun, to find what language that yeah, we understand the concept, we understand the pain points, or like things we are happy about. It's easy. But once we start working together, like if we four would need to develop a change management plan to a specific client in South Korea, I believe that we would have here the different starts. What we do So hold on, like maybe it just looks easy now, but once we start working together, I believe like then as it's same as in the family, then when you open the fridge, you start seeing the differences.
I think there's a book called The Culture Map by,
Erin Mayer.
I want to say Erin Mayer. Yes, thank you. And I found that really interesting to understand the scale and then where countries are on that scale. So you understand how people behave, how people react and respond. And having worked in, as an English person who's worked in France, and often I used to sit there thinking, what is going on? Why am I feeling like this? And then I read that book and I went, oh, okay, that's why I was feeling like that. That now makes perfect sense. I wish I'd had this book 20 years ago. That would have given me a lot fewer, sleepless nights as to why do I feel like a fish out of water in this situation? And I think that is, having that perspective is incredibly helpful.
I think it is the same as, you would do different personality types. You can do a personality test, you can look into the cultural narratives and so on, but we cannot say that, okay, this is, all of you are like this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It all comes down to a person. It all comes down to the culture. It all comes down to a team. And I think what is important here is that, the cross-cultural topic is so broad. It covers not only the communications. So I think what is important is first work with a mindset not to put people into the boxes. Have it as a guide, but not, but try a hypothesis, see if it is correct, if my assumption is correct. And another one, what I think where internal comms is really crucial, and I think the tools that we're giving in the tool are universal, is to, find the answers to the questions for a certain audiences. So to really understand what can help me to answer those questions. So not to have the answers, British are this, American this, Lithuanians are like this, but to kind of get a broader context about how can I approach my communications so I would be understood better.
Well, let me pick up on the broader context comment, because obviously, moving from the concept of multiculturalism or, cultural diversity, or however we choose to define it, towards what kind of world are we looking at right now? What's your sense of what's on the minds of employees and leaders, particularly in your part of the world? And are we seeing a lot of distraction at the moment?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question once you pointed it out for the briefing. It's, I think what the particular specifics of our region is that we are, on the eastern side and our geopolitics. So this is something that is maybe not a distraction, but that's something that we live with every day. And it's probably when we work with our counterparts in Germany and France and all of the different countries, it's not felt the same way. I mean, talking about Ukraine and all of the other things, but it's affecting, leaders here are really thinking about it every day because it affects their business every day. in amount of investments coming in, business deals and stuff like that. So, and the broader understanding of the whole political world and geopolitical world, I think it's something that is definitely in the backs of the heads in the region here.
But I think that it's like talking from the communication perspective, Gen Z globally, what they want from the managers is like, tell me the positions, share with me your values, be clear, like what you think, be accessible with getting to know the information. And I think these are the challenges managers generally face.
Yeah.
Just the topics which are being brought on the table might be here are more sensitive. Because like, do you support Israel or do you support Palestine? Do you support Russia? Do you support Ukraine? And people want to hear these answers, and not necessarily every manager or every company is ready to deliver it. So here the challenge starts.
Is there also a sense that you're being asked to do a lot more scenario planning? So you've got an expectation from employees around reputation, and we hear that a lot through things like Edelman surveys, that people, employees want to hear what their business thinks and where their business stands and making a stand, and etc. But if you're also talking about, to put no finer point on it, conflict, war, that's at your doorstep, what kind of scenario planning is actually happening, and is internal communication being brought into that scenario planning to help understand how you can keep employees updated, make sure that employees feel connected if something does become closer?
Janet, I will disappoint you because actually I will disappoint you now because we started, from this war situation. And actually, biggest need at the moment from the companies is like, help us to communicate to people how to bring them from the home offices back to the office. Support us with that. So this is actually the main rolling topic across governmental, private, or other type of companies, like how to bring people back to work in the offices. So actually, in my consultancy work, this is the hottest topic at the moment.
Yeah,
Wow.
this was the hottest topic, a few years back on day one. This was a very hot topic where everybody didn't know what's going on, what's gonna be happening, and how severe it's gonna be. Everybody did that, but right now it is definitely how to bring people to bring back to the office, and it is caused by how to say actually preparation for recession. So people are talking about recession for a long time. Also, the geopolitical situation doesn't help for this as well. And this is something that is also like, we need more result, we need more collaboration. And obviously leaders who prefer to have the team in the office and they see the collaboration is better in the office being physically present. This is what they're trying to achieve by having people back in the office.
What are your topics you are working with? Like, what are your main topics?
I mean, for me at the moment, it's a lot of change. And it's a lot of either new CEOs going into organizations and bringing in new values, new ways of working, and so I'm doing a lot of work around that. It's a lot of change. And I think, we've said change, for I think probably about 20 years, I was told by one of the first CEOs I worked with, change is a constant, Janet, just get used to it. And that hasn't gone away. I'm seeing more of that. Mike, what about you?
What I'm seeing more of is kind of a broader cultural issue at the moment, which is kind of a more of a reversion to, or a more louder version of alpha male management, which is how RTO is being seen over here. It's basically managers saying, damn it, we're going to do it the old fashioned way. You're going to get back into the office and I'm going to tell you what to do. And certainly with the political changes taking place in the US, the Doge office of Musk and Ramaswamy saying, we're going to get those federal employees back to the office. There's unquestionably the RTO issue plus or times this kind of cultural backsliding. That's kind of a huge issue that I'm seeing. But then there's also, a big, we just had a debate about it yesterday on We Lead Comms. Is this the biggest cultural trend? Is it AI? Is it climate change? Is it our own ability to prove our value? All of this stuff people are having to deal with at once. And, the real issue is the extent to which we're prepared to deal with any of it.
But what I hear, like Janet said that she was like 20 years ago already having these questions, how to lead change in organization. So I feel like our book, The Connected Organizations, will never be out of date content-wise, because the questions which we solve in organizations are actually, the topics may change, but the issues stay the same. And then the communication practices we apply, we learn from that, but it's also not changing so rapidly, like the models, the successful key elements what we implement. So I'm happy to hear that the content-wise we will not be out of date soon.
Well, the dynamics of internal communication never change. You have people who work for each other inside of power relationships where there are inefficiencies in terms of power, money, and resources. And that will never change. That's fundamental to organizational life. I wrote an internal comms book 10 years ago. And, I'm not sure if you guys have seen it or not. I think I've shared
We
it.
read it.
You read it, that's right. And it's like, it doesn't change. The dynamics of this stuff doesn't change. It's a question of what are the content topics at the moment.
I think one of the things that I have been most touched by recently is I saw somebody who is based in Ukraine for a huge global organization, with all of the things that he's got going on politically around him, economically, the sort of the socio-economic challenges that he is dealing with, he was focused on the future and a sustainability project, because he wanted to make sure that his country was ready for the end of the war so that he could create a great country for future generations of Ukrainian children. And at that point, I was gone. Tears, and it was such a beautiful, it was the way he expressed it. And I had been thinking very practically about scenario planning and how do you do this and what is the narrative and how do you make sure that this shifts and how do you make sure that you're staying relevant? How do you make sure that you're saying the right things and giving people, all of the sort of the practicalities. And what I had completely missed in what he was doing was actually, I'm looking forward. I am looking at the vision of what I want after all of this is finished and we have it's solved in whatever way it gets solved. How am I creating the best place for my children and my children's children? And I thought, okay, that you're looking at change with hope and hope for the future. And I thought that was incredibly powerful. And we sort of talked about, how do you phrase this? How do you storytell when people around you are all dealing with the immediacy of war and bombing and challenges? And actually what you want to do is make sure that you're creating a space that you want to be proud of for your children to occupy. And I thought that was something really special. And I think it's something that maybe a lot of as internal communicators, we don't get into every day because we're not put into these positions every day. But it was a very big wake-up call for me to think, okay, you've got all of the practical, but sometimes you can allow yourself in that position to be aspirational and lead with hope.
This is really touching. Really.
I know. I would literally, when I was doing the thing, and there were tears in my eyes. It was so emotional. And I thought it was one of the most moving things I'd ever seen, I'd ever read. Sorry, didn't mean to bring the mood down.
But I think that as communicators, we really very often need to show this bigger picture and the goal, like the purpose of all the things what is happening in the world. And having this great story to tell and to share that people want to share them to the other people, this is actually the result of a great communicator. So, and it can be in many different fields. So that's why really understanding, getting these little details, connecting the points, and being able to share it, that's the magic, what internal comms does.
Yeah. And I think it's a kind of a reminder, if we kind of go back to that know, do, feel.
Yeah.
He'd really leaned into, I want people to feel hope. I want people to feel that there is a future. And I thought, by focusing there, he's created this narrative, this story that is so powerful. It's incredibly moving. So yeah.
And building on the
about bringing the mood down, I think this is one of the things that internal communicators are being asked to do too often is, make this look good, this is really bad, but make this look good,
Yeah.
No, it doesn't have to be this way, and I think it's important. I'm actually on a mission to normalize bad news and to normalize bad news communication as early as possible. And I even have a method for that. It's not in this book, but maybe in the next one.
That's worth a book on its own. That's fantastic
That's
stuff.
definitely one of the things that is really important, because there's still a lot of this coming on that, we have new KPIs. They are 3 times bigger than the last year. Let's communicate and make sure that we achieve them. But it's not the communication issue to achieve the KPIs. It's all of the organization has to work differently to achieve them. So you cannot make it pretty by saying, we just changed the KPIs and we'll get them. So it's a very important, because people know when you're honest or not. They will know.
Let me we just have a couple minutes here, and I want to bring the mood back up before we leave.
Yay!
And it may be by being really good at what brings the mood down. What are your biggest hopes for the coming year, both of you? Or what are your biggest hopes for 2025? We just filmed this before 25, so that's kind of why I asked the question.
My hope for next year is less product in terms of communication and more impact. I think it's going that direction, but it's getting more and more about what impact we want to achieve with the communication, but not how much product we want to produce, how many articles, how many clicks, and so on.
Amen to that.
Giedrė?
I would like to have more connected people and to have technological solutions that help to include people in communications. Because myself, I work with lots of logistical and production companies. And what I see that huge amounts of people are left behind with communication, happening with them once, twice per year or never. And I think with the current development level, we really can have all the people easily being accessed and also to hear their voices in a whole organization or among each other.
I love that. I love the idea of making sure that people feel that they're putting an emphasis on employee voice. And allowing people to understand what's going on, but also to allow them to be part of the conversation. I think if we end up with a socio-economic, political, whatever is going to be happening in the next couple of years, being connected is increasingly important.
And on that note, I'd like to thank you very much for participating, Vija and Giedrė. Thank you again, Janet, for outstanding co-hosting. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Navigating Disruption podcast.